He says, go ahead and kill the families. Go ahead and torture. Go ahead and go further than waterboarding. What happens when people follow those orders or don't follow them? It's not clear that Donald Trump will have their back.
Reuters Pentagon correspondent, our buddy Idrees Ali. Idrees, so good to see you. Thank you for hopping on the program with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Idrees, I want to start with this high-level question here, which I just thought about maybe like 2 minutes before we hopped on air, because we've been talking about the boat strikes over the last couple of weeks and months, right? We've had some folks that you know very well over at the Pentagon with NPR reporter Tom Bowman has been on the show. We've had Joe Rubin, who formerly worked at the State Department for years in 2 different administrations. I've had a member of Congress on with Representative Johnny Olszewski talking about all of this. I started thinking about this and I was like, let me see if I can frame this question a little bit different. Idrees, why is this story so important? To me, I think the reason why it's important is this is the first time we're actually seeing maybe somebody that we all thought was woefully unqualified for this role in Pete Hegseth, leading the largest military in the world. So I think this is the first kind of stress test, seeing somebody in administration that we all thought was woefully unqualified for this. And that's why I think it's important, in addition to obviously some human rights things and things like that. Why do you think this story is why is this story so important?
So, I think there are a couple of points to this. I think, first of all, it is worth mentioning that the U.S. military, ever since its existence and definitely over the past 20 years, has carried out operations that many people, would consider maybe, on the cusp of legality, potentially not even legal, and have killed people in ways that are not, consistent with international law, right? So the U.S. military, potentially killing people may or may not, for certain be quote unquote terrorists is not new in itself. What I think makes this particularly interesting and why so many people have focused in on this is it is really the culmination of what we've been happening at the Pentagon, really over the last 10, 11 months, right? One of the first few things in the first few months, what Secretary Hegseth did, who again, has had prior to this job, no real management experience, and now he's, heading one of the largest organizations in the world. One of the first things in his first few weeks in office and first few months in office was to not only fire the top U.S. general and the head of the Navy, he also fired the top lawyers for each of the military services. And from the go, you're seeing him sort of really go after the military legal system. In his book, he's written about how frustrated he used to be with JAGs, sort of the military lawyers, because he felt that they were constraining him and what he said were warfighters during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And so really what's happening is this culmination of Hegseth's sort of assault and really going after the military justice system. The other reason this is important is, I think most legal experts have said, not just since September 2nd, double tap, but all the strikes that have taken place are very questionable legally. And so when you've had about 21 strikes, more than 80 people killed, seeing or hearing about one strike where there might have been survivors who were struck and killed, I think is really resonating people, because it really brings home, I think, what has taken part in those other 20 strikes, which is really, should this be happening under international law and even domestic law, and what are sort of the accountability steps that are going to happen? And the strike on September 2nd, I think, was so simple in many ways, right? It was described by people who have seen the video, including lawmakers, as, 2 people who were essentially in the ocean, potentially on a boat that was, partially at least destroyed, and they were killed. And so I think its simplicity is something that a lot of people can understand and really question.
So let me ask you about the strikes in general with specificity here, because over the weekend, I saw some members of Congress, Jim Himes, if I'm not mistaken, the representative, said that the general that spoke with all of them, Frank Bradley, the admiral, excuse me, he told them that this boat wasn't headed towards the United States. It was actually headed somewhere else. And there was some other things that was said behind closed doors in this meeting that he did. Can you kind of update the public on where we are with respect to this story and what happened with that meeting with some members of Congress there and the admiral?
Yeah, so last week we saw Admiral Bradley, the head of, at the time was Joint Special Operations Command. Now he's the head of U.S. Special Operations Command, and he briefed key lawmakers on the September 2nd strike and actually showed the video. And with people coming out of the briefings, I think their understanding was that he explained the context around what happened and what actually happened on that day. And, the pressure that had been building up in advance of this briefing was really sort of bipartisan. What we saw after the briefing was really a partisan reaction where people like Jim Himes and other Democrats coming out and saying this is abhorrent. It's, I think Jim Himes said this is the worst thing he's seen in public service. And then Republican lawmakers like Tom Cotton saying, we saw the video. We think it's legal. What he did was right. And, we stand behind him. And so really sort of splintered into sort of the partisan, almost political jostling that takes place on many other issues. What we do know essentially is that on September 2nd, this is the first time a strike has taken place, in the Caribbean by U.S. military forces. A suspected drug vessel was struck. It was not destroyed, and there were 2 survivors. What happens next is sort of a question of dispute depending on who has seen the video. Democrats say they were essentially, survivors, stranded, and they did not pose any threat, and they were killed anyway. Republicans say they were in a boat that still had drugs in it, potentially illicit drugs, and so they were a threat and a legitimate target. Where the boat is headed, I think, has also been a matter of debate. In the sort of the Truth Social post that Trump had when this first took place, he had said they were heading to the United States. The day after, this has sort of been September 3rd, Secretary of State Marco Rubio had said it was heading somewhere else. And so that's always been a sort of question for debate. And it's one of those interesting things where I think, people and reporters and lawmakers and experts have really said, look, release the video so the American people and people around the world can make up their minds, because right now you're getting sort of a split screen view of what happened, and it's almost like a disagreement on what they saw.
Idrees, one of the things that has been annoying me the most about this is really in my space, right? The political commentary, news panel spaces, that I do. And I'm watching some of these strategists on both sides of the aisle either in one regard say, why are you defending drug dealers? They're just drug dealers. We should be killing them anyway. And then you got the other people that are like, there's a due process angle here. And also you're blowing up boats indiscriminately that you have no idea if these people are actually what you claim they are. Narco-terrorism is a made-up term, as somebody formerly from the State Department came over here and told me on this show. So I'm curious for you, because the arguments in either direction, like you just mentioned there, about what was actually seen on the boat and whether these guys pose threats. But what do you make of the broader and why, and tying it back into why it matters? Because again, everyone is allowed their due date in court. If these are actually drug dealers, I think the administration would have more people behind them if they carried out more law enforcement, tactical, whether it be, seizing of these, whatever's on these passenger boats, bringing these people to justice, having trials and things like that, rather than indiscriminately bombing these boats. And again, we don't know who has been on them or where they were going, as you said, with the conflicting reports. What do you make of the way it's actually been playing out across the news sphere, and the way Republicans have pigeonholed it as Democrats are supporting these drug dealers, and Democrats are like, how about we follow law and order here?
I think this partially is exacerbated by the lack of information that the administration has given, right? Even to lawmakers, they have sort of given this vague, broad legal justification saying these are quote unquote narco terrorists and then they're enemy combatants. I'm sure you've talked to legal experts. The ones I've talked to say that has no bearing on international or national law. Just because you say they are enemy combatants does not make them so. Show us the legal rationale. And there is a sort of a classified Office of Legal Counsel at the Justice Department legal finding, but that has not really been made available to lawmakers. And what we do know about it is it's, again, quite vague, right? So the legal rationale is not holding up because it really hasn't been provided in any detail. And so that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I think there is this, I think the track record for this administration has been such where they have sort of taken action, sort of, uh, not necessarily briefed Congress, appropriately on other things, whether it was the Iran strikes or whatever you have. And so there's this suspicion, I think, that has built in with this administration, the way that they handle things, right? Hegseth's tenure has been marred by controversy, whether we're talking about Signalgate, his use of the Signal app to share sensitive information at the very least. And other sort of snafus, I think, is making a lot of people really question whether, he is the right man for such a tall task. And then the third thing, I think exactly what you said. Historically, the US has relied on the Coast Guard to interdict these vessels, and they're actually doing it at record pace now. So it really raises the question, why not invest this money into something that is 100% legal, and then send them to court? I think you're going to remember we had broke this story a couple of weeks ago. It feels like a bit more, about two survivors, right? And here was a perfect chance to take these survivors, present them in court, and say they are, guilty of trafficking. That did not happen, and I think it further raised questions to your point about, if you're so confident this is illegal activity, why not present it in court when you had the opportunity, and therefore, that opportunity was first foregone. And so when you add all that, I think, Democrats, in many eyes of many, are rightfully saying, how is this acceptable?
I did want to ask you, staying on Secretary Hegseth here for a second, because there's two things that are playing out. You just touched on one of them, and then there's something else happening, obviously, with Senator Mark Kelly, that back and forth. I want to know where that's going. But let's talk about the Signal Gate, because there was that Inspector General's report that came out recently. Obviously, people are saying it's damning in terms of what information came out about it with respect to the secretary. He said he's been totally exonerated, a typical move of folks in the Trump administration ethos. Where's the middle ground here, Idrees? For people that don't know what the report actually stated, break it down for us a little bit of what the report found, and is it in either direction? Is it exonerating him, or is it actually implicating him in a bunch?
So the way I've sort of explained it to people is, if you were Pete Hegseth the night before the release, you were probably pretty nervous, right? This could have been potentially quite explosive. The day after it was released, I think he was probably a bit relieved because, in many ways, it did fault him for breaking DoD, Department of Defense regulations, going against them. But in other ways, he was not exonerated, but maybe there was no smoking gun in the way people had, sort of talked about. So, one example, and this is an important point, is the report said that the information Secretary Hegseth received from U.S. Central Command, which carried out the strikes, was classified. But what they all added was that the person who can declassify it is Secretary Hegseth. And so it actually did not make a judgment call on whether the secretary should classify the information on Signal or not, because they said, look, he is technically the authority that can declassify this information. So it sort of went into technicalities, but really important technicalities. Some other point that we know is Secretary Hegseth did not sit down for an interview to actually provide more details. So in the investigation actually says it relied heavily on the text messages that The Atlantic had published. So in many ways, I think, again, it sort of depends on which perspective you're coming from. If you are someone who is looking for a smoking gun that would really, tie Secretary Hegseth very clearly to sharing classified information without declassifying it, it probably missed the mark. But if you're someone who said, look, as one part of the report says, if this information was intercepted by an adversary, it could have put U.S. troops at harm. Well, if you're coming from that perspective, that did happen. Not that the information was classified, or not that the information was intercepted. It actually wasn't. But it did put service members potentially at risk if that happened. And so if you're a critic, you're going to say, look, the secretary's job is to protect U.S. troops, and he, could have potentially risked that. So that's where we are. again, it's sort of fallen into partisan lines. Democrats saying, "Look, this is terrible." Republicans are sort of taking a victory lap.
This episode of Can We Please Talk is presented by our friends over at Fresh Roasted Coffee. Delicious tasting coffee since 2009. They've been our proud sponsor. You see the promo code there. Look at this. They sent me this beautiful kit right here. Listen to that. Listen to that seal coming out, right? What's in it? Environmentally safe, compostable K-Pods. I love the dark Mexican blend. You can go to their website right now, take the quiz. That quiz is going to put you with a flavor profile. Listen to that sound of the coffee that you're going to be matched up with. Go to freshroastedcoffee.com. Click the link right now in our show notes. You can see it right there. Click that link. It's going to take you to the site. When you get to checkout, use our promo code, Can We Please Get 20? All one word, Can We Please Get 20, 20. You're going to get 20% off your first purchase. Head to freshroastedcoffee.com, our official sponsor of the Can We Please Talk podcast. Let me stay on, you just mentioned Democrats. I would think it was about 2 weeks ago now. I'm drowning into the news cycle here, Idrees, but there was a video from Democratic lawmakers, including Senator Mark Kelly, who's obviously a former Navy pilot. And they made this video about following orders, not following illegal orders, and following, obviously, the Constitution, not being beholden to a singular person, right? That drew the ire of not only people at the Pentagon with specifically Pete Hegseth, but it got people over these last couple of days posting a video of Pete Hegseth in his former job at my former employer, Fox News, saying this. And I want you to take a listen. We're going to react on the other side.
The military's not going to follow illegal orders. And so the Trump campaign was forced to change their position and say, we're going to try to change the law so that the military can operate within the law. That's a tall order also. Here's the problem with Trump. He says, go ahead and kill the families. Go ahead and torture. Go ahead and go further than waterboarding. What happens when people follow those orders or don't follow them? It's not clear that Donald Trump will have their back. Donald Trump is oftentimes about Donald Trump. And so if you're not changing the law and you're just saying it, you create even more ambiguity.
So, Idrees, I mean, that guy you heard is now running the largest military in the world, and he was upset about somebody who actually served in this country's military saying something to the similar effect of not following illegal orders. Can you kind of explain for the audience what the hell we're talking about here with this back and forth between Senator Mark Kelly and obviously and Secretary Pete Hegseth? Do you think the court-martial will actually happen? I don't think there's a precedent for a retired officer being court-martialed. You can explain that. And then also, what do you make of the comments and the flip positioning now that Pete Hegseth finds himself in?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a fascinating and unprecedented situation, right? A sitting senator is being, threatened to be called back into service and potentially being court-martialed. This all stems from this video that was done by Senator Kelly and a bunch of other Democratic lawmakers saying what, many people believe was just stating facts, which is do not follow an illegal order. And that is fact. They do not have to follow orders that are broadly and generally perceived as being illegal. What I think happened is President Trump, and he really kicked it off by, truth socialing about it, was the perception that they were insinuating that some illegal orders had already taken place. The video didn't say that, but I think that is the perception amongst the administration officials. And that really kicked off this chain where President Trump went after the people in this video, other Democratic lawmakers who actually had, sort of taken part in this. And that was followed up by Secretary Hegseth saying, look, I can't go after the other folks in the video because they're not sort of, under his jurisdiction, but Senator Kelly is. And so he told the Secretary of Navy to have some sort of action or decision on what action to take place by December the 10th. So that would be Wednesday. And really, there's a sort of a wide variety of things that can take place. On the one extreme end, you have court-martial, right? Coming back into the military and being court-martialed, which is the extreme step. And then on the other sort of maybe less draconian is administrative punishment, where he is potentially docked a rank, which means that his sort of retirement benefits go down to a lower rank. Obviously, if he's court-martialed, that would be huge. But I think either way, the fact that this administration is going after someone who is no longer in the military, who's retired, who is a lawmaker, I think for many people, free speech advocates nonetheless say this is going to have a huge chilling effect because you are telling everyone in the United States that if you're a senator, we can go after you. So if you're a regular American, you better be careful. To your second point, I think that's fascinating, right? Secretary or Pete Hegseth, the Fox News analyst, and Fox News commentator, had views that are sort of not playing out for Secretary Hegseth at the Pentagon, and I know we're going to talk about this soon, but we haven't really had the chance as Pentagon reporters to ask those questions to him because we're sort of not in a position to ask those anymore.
Well, Idrees, you just funneled into the follow-up beautifully because, obviously I know a few of you guys in the real Pentagon press corps, as I like to call it, okay? Because I worked with Jennifer Griffin once upon a time. Obviously, Tom Bowman now has become a friend of the show. You're obviously a friend of the show. So I know a few of you folks out there. I know the hard work that you guys put into this. I saw Barbara Starr tweeting something over to Pete Hegseth about fog of war and all of that stuff. I'm not even going to ask you about that, but I do want to ask you about the new Pentagon press corps and all of these, obviously, I don't even know how to say it, Idrees. All of these content creators that shouldn't be anywhere near the Pentagon, to be honest with you, from the Cam Higbees of the world, Laura Loomers, to now you're seeing the former congressman that's now with OAN that is now asking questions at the Pentagon. But one of the things that I heard, because I tuned into that Pentagon press briefing to kind of hear some of the line of questioning, right? And of course, Kingsley Wilson, who is the press secretary there, she started off the press conference by saying this, and I want you to take a listen. I want to react on the other side.
Legacy media chose to self-deport from this building, and if you look at the numbers, it's pretty clear why no one followed them. National trust in these mainstream media outlets has cratered to 28%, the lowest ever recorded. The American people don't trust these propagandists because they stopped telling the truth. So we're not going to beg these old gatekeepers to come back, and we're not rebuilding a broken model just to appease them. Instead, we're welcoming new media outlets that actually reach Americans, ask real questions, and don't pursue a biased agenda.
There's like a scintilla of truth in her thing in terms of reach, which we could get into as to why that's bad. The rest of it, you can throw it in the waste paper basket because, again, you guys have done the legwork. You guys have the background. These are folks that have gotten their prominence, majority of them, through YouTube and through making incendiary content. I would love for you to kind of, and I know there's some pending litigation out there that maybe you can't comment on, but I would love for you to get your comments on what she just said, because like you just said a second ago, you can't ask Secretary Hegseth this stuff because, again, you guys and Reuters and other outlets decided not to sign the new clause that the Pentagon wanted to have all of the media kind of sign, right? These other outlets decided to do it because they wanted to get the access. And that's not what journalism is. It's not about the access. It's about asking the questions and holding people accountable. So what'd you make of her statement? I haven't had a chance to talk to you about this. And what do you make of, again, the what she said about the self-deporting part of this? Because we know why you guys self-deported.
Yeah, look, so I mean, broad context, reporters who were sort of residing in the Pentagon were asked to sign a document which made it really impossible to sign because it essentially, went after those who were went after those who would solicit information, not even classified information, just sort of, regular information. As a journalist, your job is to solicit information, right? So that was a sort of a no-go. So I think most people would take would have a gripe with the way it's described as self-deporting, because, I think no reporter would want to leave, the building that they cover, but it's something that had to be done, sort of in the name of free speech. And what we've seen in recent days is the New York Times has filed a lawsuit against the Pentagon, saying this is a major violation and that's something that's going to, sort of take place in court. And what I will say is, I think, what the United States is undertaking militarily is pretty amazing and pretty stark, right? We had the national security strategy come out on Friday, which said the United States or the Trump administration is going to sort of bring back the Monroe Doctrine in Latin America. That is a wholesale change in the way the US military operates and sort of focuses on. And the American people and people around the world are not going to be able to rely on sort of mainstream outlets, the biggest newspapers, TVs, wires in the world, and radios in the world, to ask those questions from senior officials in public events. We still have sources. We're still going after it and probably breaking as much news as we were when we were in the building. But the lack of engagement by senior leadership, whether it's Secretary Hegseth or even the Pentagon spokespeople at the podium, is something that we are not able to do because we're not really allowed to be in the building for those briefings. All of us from sort of the regular press corps had put in for requests to actually attend those briefings, and we were rejected because we were told that that's for the new media. And so these briefings are rare. They've become pretty rare in this administration. You can count on one hand how many times they've briefed us, and we are, so when it's happening, it's being limited to sort of these new media folks who, some will have different priorities, some will have different agendas, and so it doesn't take advantage of the decades of experience that the Pentagon press corps had amongst them to really parse what are really technical, nuanced things that are taking place. And I think for that, a lot of people are going to, not maybe see the full picture in a way that they could in a public briefing.
And I think that's the intent, unfortunately, Idrees. And that's why we have you on the show. That's why Nick and I created this type of platform, because this is the home for nuance. I don't care if you don't like the nuance. This is the nuance. There's a reason why your episode of the Afghanistan and explaining the 20-year war was one of our best performing videos. And if you want to check out more of the content from Idrees, Reuters.com, you can check out all of Idrees' work. Follow the actual Pentagon press corps. Idrees, I can't thank you enough for hopping on the podcast, man. Continue success. Please stay safe, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, everybody. Mike Leon from the Can We Please Talk podcast. Thank you so much for watching this clip. Do me a favor. Hit subscribe. You're going to get more content from us over at Can We Please Talk.